All right, so last time we were working on the site for the class, www time, and we managed to edit, we used the Firebug to edit and to tweak the display a little bit, and then we edited the CSS using the WordPress backend, the dashboard for WordPress. We're going to go back to the more traditional way, and we're going to have two separate files, a styles.css and an index.html file, and we're going to use the style.css file to affect the HTML file. Since we don't really need to deal with the HTML, I just want to use a basic HTML file that we can mess around with. We're going to use one from a site called the Zen Garden. Zen Garden was a site that was set up intending to look at ways that you could make use of CSS. This was when CSS was fairly new, and it was trying to show that you really could do all the things that you were supposed to be able to do with CSS and really push towards this idea of separation. So it is this basic HTML file and then several hundred different ways of implementing it using different CSS files. So this page and this page and this page and this page are all based on exactly the same HTML. It's just the CSS has changed. And so we're going to go ahead and download the sample HTML file. I'll go ahead and save the link as, I'm going to save it as index.html. And we'll go ahead, no, we're going to leave the CSS file. We don't need to use theirs. We'll go ahead and use our own and start from scratch. So let's go ahead and open up that index file in the HTML file I'm using Notepad++. All right, so well, I'm not going to give the full tour here. As he notes actually down here, he's basically put in lots and lots of different tags. He says there are more classes and extraneous tags than are needed, and he's put in lots of extra things so that it's really easy to get your handle on this. In real life, you'd probably edit this down a little bit in terms of where you're putting different tags. However, because he wants to make it accessible to the widest possible sort of exploitation by CSS, he has basically ID tags on everything, and he has lots and lots of classes here that we can make use of. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a look and see what this looks like when we open it up in a browser real quick to start with. So this is just the plain index file. Right now it has no CSS, and so this file and this are exactly the same thing. The only difference between this and this is that this one has no CSS file associated with it yet. So you kind of can take all the pieces here, and if you look, these are graphical elements. These are affecting the kind of in fact, this is a graphic for the title, something I wouldn't have done, but they've changed kind of where things are laid out on the page, and they've changed the way the text looks. This time around, we're only going to look at how to affect the way the text is laid out and what it looks like. So by default, this is what the browser does, and we want to change the font, we want to change the size of some of these, and maybe some of the alignment and the way things are spaced out and distributed. We're not going to do any big block moves or anything like that. We're just going to deal with the text this time around. So let's take another look at the file itself. You'll see that I'm just going to mention this in passing. It said this in some of the readings we had, but this is a different way to load in the style sheet, but we're still using sample.css. Actually, let's call it the one we like, which is style.css. Now, we're not going to, this is the only change I'm going to make to this file. We're not going to make any other changes here. We've got a doc type, we've got all the pieces, we know kind of where to find things. So I really don't need the index file anymore. So I'll go ahead and close it and open up a new one, and I'm going to file save as style.css. So the first thing we're going to deal with here is the title. This is what sort of a tag is there. Well, we can use the web bug to check real quick. So we'll check out the CSS Zen Garden. And this is just a span with no style rules and an H1. And if we look at the H1, it's really the only H1 on the page. So if we want to create a rule that will work with this, we can go back to our document here, and we can go ahead and put in a reference H1. And we're just going to say this works for all the H1s. We open the bracket, which means all the rules that we're putting in here are going to have to do, all the properties are going to have to do with every H1 on the page. And we're going to start with the size we did last time. So we'll go ahead and say font size And it's already bigger by default, but let's make it a little less overwhelming and just say 3M. So we've got the font size. We've done that before. Let's take a look and make sure that that's working. So we've made it actually a little bit bigger than it was before. Now what do we do? We saw it before. What do we do about font family? That family is actually a list of druthers. That is, if I could have any font in the world, the font that I would want here is Helve's Super Cool. That's the one I really want to use. Let's see how that looks. It looks exactly the same. Oh, that's kind of a bummer. Oh, that's right. I don't have Helve Super Cool on this computer. I do on some computers, but I don't have it on this computer. I may have Garamond on this computer, and if I don't, I should probably have a safety. Let's use Times New Roman. I'm pretty confident that one's on this machine, but it's possible it's not on there. And in this case, I need to use just any serifed font. Look what I've done there. I've listed a sort of druthers. What I'd have if I had my choice. If I had, my best choice would be Helve Super Cool. If you don't have that one installed, use Garamond. If you don't have that one installed, use Times New Roman. If you don't have that one installed, you must have serif installed. By default, by the standard, every browser that's produced can produce serif, which is just kind of like a generic, like beer. It's just a generic font. Or sans serif, another generic font. Those are the ones you're most likely to use. There's actually, I think, 3 others, monospace, fantasy, and cursive, as kind of 3 other ones that you can use as default ones. The chances that you're going to use cursive ever are fairly slim. And the browser just kind of, when they build the browser, they say, okay, let's build in some fonts that are going to work. They're usually associated with actual fonts, but never mind. You need to have this kind of safety. At the very end, you need to say, okay, if none of these worked, we'll use this. Some browsers, you can count on some things like Times New Roman generally in Windows systems is installed. Arial is generally installed. Trebuchet actually is generally installed. I'll link to lists that show you what's installed where, but you have to kind of have a list between my ideal to my safety font. So let's just see what happens when we do this. File save. We'll refresh. And I know you can't tell, but that's actually Garamond. So Garamond was installed. That was my second choice, but it's on this computer, so it got listed out. All right. Let's turn from the header for a moment and take a look at just a regular paragraph tag. So if we look down here, it says that this is actually a class P1. So we can associate it with class P1. We might do something with that later on. For now, let's just deal with it being a P. We'll just use the P selector. So we're going to do another one for Ps. That's right. So for the P word, let's start with kind of, we'll add in some line height. You don't really want a double space on the web, but it's nice to have a little extra height. So let's just do 1.8. And we're also going to space things out a little bit. We'll do some letter spacing. And we'll make it no, we don't want to do 1.8. That's crazy. We'll do 1M and see what that looks like. All right. Oh, we need to close that. Close the curly brackets. I'll save it. I'll go back here. We'll refresh. Okay, so we've spaced things out a lot this way, and we've spaced things out by 1M this way, so we've given a little bit of space. I think this is way too much spacing. This might be one of those rare cases where we don't want to use M as our measure, but we'll keep doing it. Let's try 0.2M and see what that looks like. So that's a little bit better. We have 0.2, just a little bit of extra space. We could actually get crazy. I don't know how Firefox will handle this. Let's try it and see what happens. Negative 0.3. That is, do negative letter spacing. Yeah, that's not exactly readable. All right. So as you can see, I would not recommend you do this with a real site, but you have a lot of flexibility. What you could do is use this to do some interesting header designs without ever having to deal with an image. But you can't rely on how browsers especially will deal with things like negative letter spacing. All modern browsers at this point will handle both line height and letter spacing, but you don't know how they do the weird stuff.